So I have a couple of questions. First of all, I just want to say I found your show here within the last couple of months, and I absolutely love it. I think you guys do a great job. So just want to say keep up the great work.
Well, thanks.
So the first question I have, I guess, is kind of theological, and it's about whether or not Jesus actually existed. And Tracie and Don, do you guys believe that there was a person or a prophet that actually existed that was named Jesus Christ?
I think that's the wrong question. I think the question you really want to be asking is, are the supernatural claims associated with this guy accurate or not? And it's almost irrelevant whether he existed or not.
Well, but for the purposes of your question, I would say I simply don't know. I mean, I've heard the cases for and against, and I understand that currently, whether for good reason or for bias, depending on how a person looks at it, a lot of historians do still accept that Jesus is based in some part of rabbi or series of rabbis or reformers, or so whatever the explanation. There are many explanations offered. More than one is plausible to me. And like Don is saying, the least plausible is that we were dealing with a real hero of myth that is like fleshed out doing all kinds of miraculous things.
Well, there's all sorts of stories and such that didn't make it into the Bible about Jesus, and there seems to have been he seems to have been a subject of a lot of fan fiction, and because so much of early Christianity had to do with embellishment and pious fraud, it's really hard to know if anything at all is true. And so,
right. But Andre has a question though that sort of ebbs into this concept.
Exactly. I just kind of wanted to preface that with whether or not an entity like Jesus existed. And I'm in the same camp as Tracie. I have no idea if he existed or not. But the question I wanted to ask is whether or not he existed. I feel like it has a profound effect on our society today, obviously, with all the religions that have spawned from it, but also our day-to-day life when it comes to the current calendar that we're using. It's based on the life and death of Jesus. I mean, we're talking about BC, before Christ.
Right. I wanted to ask if you've heard of CE and BCE, of the Common Era and before the Common Era.
I actually have not, no.
You might want to look into that because we're moving away from the BC AD and have been for a while. In academic circles, they dropped it a long time ago. And it's now moving into textbooks, into even there are some religious entities that are using it. I looked it up before I got on the call, and one of the things that it listed was religious groups that are incorporating it as well now. So it's just the Common Era, before the Common Era.
So it's an acknowledgement that there was a historical decision made to start our numbering this way, but it's sort of just saying, hey, relative to this numbering, these are the dates we're talking about.
Right, and some people will call out that, for example, our days of the week, some of the days of the week are based on Norse gods. Right,
Thursday, Friday, Wednesday.
Right, yep, okay.
So yes, religion does impact cultural. There's a lot of cultural sayings, right? There's things that you say that aren't really religious, but you say them. Like, for example, you'll see someone who has something horrible happening in their life, and you say, there, but for the grace of God go I. And it's just it's a colloquial kind of phrase that just means that could happen to me too, right? I mean, that's really what you're saying. Right. And when people say things like, God helps those who helps themselves, what they're telling you is you better go do it if you want it done. Don't sit around waiting for God to do it, or it's never going to get done. So you need to do this. So there's a lot of phrases that we use that are sort of couched in religious terminology, but when you really look at them, they're not really saying anything religious.
Well, and Christianity permeates our culture in this country, right?
We agree, I think.
Mm-hmm. Right, so I guess the question I had was, do you guys know any details about how the calendar actually came about and why it's tied into this particular entity being Jesus? And
to be honest,
Muhammad,
I'm sure that this is something that I probably looked up way back when, but it's not anything that was stored as super important to keep in my memory. But yeah, you can go look it up. The history of the calendars, the Gregorian calendars, and there's lots of different calendars that people use. And there are some groups that use more than one calendar, right? That have a calendar for a particular thing, and then a calendar that works for the rest with the rest of the world. And so, yeah, how to track time, how to track days and dates is a huge cultural thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Where
it's not just cultural. There's some very technical challenges there too.
It's wild. I mean, some of the old Mayan calendars are absolutely complicated, just wildly complicated.
They were pretty accurate.
I mean, the one ended in, 2012?
Well, I don't know. Yeah, but I mean, I had a friend who used to actually do a lecture on part of which had to do with the Mayan calendar, and she had the charts and the graphs and explanations for how these things all fit together, and it was amazing. I couldn't keep.
So the reason I wanted to ask that question was because I try and avoid having religious conversations for the most part. But if first of all, I am a non-believer. But if I was to have a conversation and wanted to advocate for belief into Jesus, that would be one of the main points. I would say, well, wait a minute, our whole calendar is based on the existence of Jesus. So,
but what about Thursday?
It's my understanding that the actual birth date of Jesus, if he actually existed, is very, very much up in the air. There's a lot of debate about when it was, and so, at the end of the day,
this would be a death date, I guess.
It's arbitrary, right? There was an arbitrary decision made for whatever reason, and we're stuck with it.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of influences.
History, right?
So I wanted to share a brief personal experience growing up with religion, and then I was hoping that you guys can maybe share your experiences that you've had and provide some input on the best ways to maybe have a conversation about religion and atheism. So I grew up in a family that wasn't necessarily all that religious, but my grandmother, especially as she got older, was extremely religious to a point where she went to church every single day. I'm from Russia originally, so she was a Christian Orthodox faith, and she went to church every day for at least an hour, hour and a half. She would stand on her knees on hardwood floors. On Sunday, she would go twice, morning and evening. So she was a really devout believer all the way until her passing. And whenever I would visit her during the summertime, she would tell me the stories from the Bible, of course, the story of Noah and the flood. And I just remember it having such a profound impact on me as a young child. It stuck with me for, I don't know, a certain amount of period, months, maybe half a year, that after she told me the story, I remember that every time it would rain outside for a prolonged amount of time, I would think that, maybe the next flood is coming and it's the second coming of Jesus, and I needed to believe.
That's awesome.
And I just think it's a very scary proposition when you're approaching those types of ideas, or indoctrinating kids with those types of ideas of fear and blind faith and belief. And obviously, the reason that I don't necessarily believe is because I don't think there's any logical proof into the religious text. I haven't really been able to convince myself that it actually happened. And I think religion as a whole uses one of the most effective emotions of fear to really convince people into believing something that they may not otherwise. And because as we grow up, especially in really religious families, and the indoctrination process really takes time over years and sometimes decades, and a lot of the kids are homeschooled. They don't really get the exposure to other belief systems or people with other experiences until they're way older and their beliefs are established. And it's really hard to break those belief systems. So I know Tracie said that you were a devout Christian growing up, and I just wanted to get your input on what kind of experiences or interactions that you had that made you question the beliefs that you had, and the people that you were surrounded by have the same belief system, I'm assuming. So was it an interaction with a person or something else that happened that all of a sudden said, maybe there's something more to this that I should consider and take a look into?
Well,
how did
to spare the people who've heard this story more times than they probably need to hear it, I'm just going to say the short answer is I went to college. And when I got to college, I met different people, right, who questioned my beliefs. And then when I tried to go and look them up to sort of, I had gone through an apologist course with Josh McDowell tapes and teachings that our minister put on, and that was what sort of swayed my head to Christianity. And so when I got questioned in college, I remembered, these were the reasons that I became a believer, and people were telling me that this was wrong, and I knew that it was right because Josh McDowell said so, right? And he sounded like he had looked all this stuff up. And so I went to the library and I looked all this stuff up to show them how wrong they were, and they were right. So for me, that was sort of the first nail in the coffin was the Bible is not infallible. The Bible is not the Word of God. The Bible is a production of human beings that has gone on for a very long time. It's been edited. It's been, subject to, voted on, selected. It is completely the product of human beings. And there's no question. Right. I mean, if you read the history, there's no question about it. And when I presented that to my minister, his response was, I have to believe God had a hand in all this. And it's like, well, you could say that about any religion, right? I mean, you could literally say that about anything you want to justify. I just have to believe God had a hand in it. It was an appalling response. And so at that point, once the legs got kicked out from under the Bible, that was sort of like, well, then what? Right? It was when I just started questioning everything. Now, so it took me about 10 years to get to what is God, right? So I started thinking to myself, if it's not what's defined in the Bible, if it has nothing to do with what I've learned in church, what is it? And that's when I started looking for, what am I calling God? What is God? What would be God? And so the more I looked, the more I found a lot of diversity and no answers, and ultimately realized that if it can't be demonstrated, if it can't be objectively demonstrated in some way, then it's an interesting idea that has no relevance for us.
Let me add real quick that if you go on our website, we have an area called testimonials, and there are a number of sort of coming out stories, if you will, of various atheists. And one of the common themes is that it's often like a 7 to 10 year process of studying and learning and examining, actively examining a lot of assumptions and things that we've sort of been told to take for granted. And I think that it's rarely, in fact, almost never an epiphany moment of, oh, this doesn't make sense. It's really often a long process.
Well, I just feel like in order to even start that process, the person has to get to a certain point in their mental state and to even be open-minded to other ideas. Because so many times, like I said, I typically don't try and not have religious conversations because what you believe is what you believe. But at the end of the day, I feel like it's, the Bible is the Word of God. This is what it says. I believe it, and
and that's the end of it.
Truth of all truths. And there's nothing you can do or say or show me. It's my faith, and I believe. And
I think you just need to lower your expectations with a lot of those folks and plant some seeds. Yeah. You're generally not going to convince somebody, but you can sow some seeds of doubt, and they might germinate over the years.
And it's interesting because Don was talking earlier about the many different Christian sects, and we had the first caller tonight was talking about personal experience with God, and the church that I attended would say that that's completely unbiblical and a false teaching, that God produced the Bible, and after the Bible was produced, they would refer to that as that which is perfect, and that which is in part, like the prophecies and the miracles and all of that, ceased, right? So they use that verse to say the Bible is the final word of God, and to them, the idea that God would give different revelations to different people is not okay. So they'd be saying, how can we all be held to account for what's in the Bible and for following the Bible if God is giving secret messages to Don and telling Tracie something else and then revealing this other thing to somebody over here, and he's giving, himself to this person, revealing this person that thing and this person that thing and guiding this person this way and that person that way. And they're just like so if God is God is sort of favoring certain people with certain biased, help that he doesn't give to others. And so then you have this situation where what is the point of the Bible if it's all about personal revelation? And if that supersedes the Bible, then what was the point of the Bible?
What's the purpose of the Bible?
Yeah, God could just reveal himself to the people that he favors.
And I listened to all the calls of the previous callers about the personal experiences, and the one question that I would always ask is, well, it's great that you had this personal experience, and there are millions of people to claim that they have had those, but not one has ever had any evidence produced from those experiences say, yes, this happened. This is evidence of my existence.
It reminds me a little bit, recently there was that horrible tragedy with the duck boat going down, and I had seen a quote that was from someone, and I'm not going to hammer a person for how they frame their expression of I feel lucky for surviving a thing like that. But when every now and then somebody will express it in a way that says, I feel like God was there for me and that God saved me or that God had a hand in me surviving this thing. And you look at that and you say, and that 1-year-old that drowned, God decided not worth helping, right? So it's like this weird thing where it's like this sort of, he picks and chooses his favorites and then just, let the rest, die and let the rest, and I saw this little thing the other day. I was looking for a facetious little quote on death, and I found this one that said, "We loved him, but God loved him more." And I thought, I hope God doesn't love me. Right. I hope God never loves me more than the people around me, because I do not want to be called home, right? Like you can just, God's fine not loving me. That's totally okay with me. I'm not going to feel offended if it means I have to die. So I don't think.
So
it's a horrible, horrible thing. It's like, how do you frame that where somebody like is murdered, for example, right?
Well, you try and justify the unjustifiable.
It's awful. I mean, are you going to say, well, this person was murdered, but I guess God loved him more? It's right. But I don't think that when people use these phrases, they're actually thinking it through. But as somebody,
of what it actually says,
right? It's really kind of horrific. But even though I understand the intent is not what's actually coming out and how it would actually, the implications are well beyond what they understand as they're saying it.
So one last follow-up on having a conversation with people that might be open-minded to the topic. So a lot of the times if I'm talking to someone, I use the opening third of the Zeitgeist about the religion and the way he describes it as a I don't know, for lack of a better word.
We have a blog post on that.
Oh, do you? Okay.
Yeah, the scholarship on that is not that great. But I think...
Well, that's what I've heard, and that's why I wanted to get your opinion, because I feel like it describes things pretty well, but at the same time, I heard that it wasn't that accurate.
Yeah, I think under our frequently asked questions, there's a link about that. Russell wrote up a piece on it. The Zeitgeist is claiming that the religion was actively made up, and I think you can make a compelling case that there were a number of religions in this sort of melting pot of Rome, and they influenced each other, and there came out to be an amalgam of various religious ideas in various religions, and I think you can claim that there are not any new ideas in Christianity, but I don't think you can claim that it was actually intentionally made up. So I think that would be the main sticking point.
Let me phrase it this way: if I were having a conversation with someone and it was a choice between suggest that they watch this versus don't suggest that they watch it, do you think having them watch it would do more harm than good?
I personally think it's always a bad idea to throw a source down that is got questionable claims in it, because what happens is when your source gets debunked on some levels, it becomes unreliable and untrustworthy to the person you're trying to use it with, and they're basically left saying this is the source. I mean, what good is a source to them where they have to sit there then and go fact check all the claims made by your source?
Right.
You might as well just give them the facts up front.
Right. That makes sense. Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much, guys. Really appreciate your time.
Sure. Thank you.